Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. More specifically, a brand new Albums I Missed video. Today we will be talking about a slew of killer records that came out in the month of May 2022 that I did not previously have the opportunity to talk about in a full album review. And there was a lot of music that came out in May 2022, so let's not waste any fucking time. Let's get right the fuck into it. First up, we have Impact is Imminent from Anvil. I think a lot of people expected me to talk about this album because it's Anvil, Canadian hard rock heavy metal legends, whose early records were supremely underrated and supremely influential to the development of thrash and speed metal, as people like Dave Mustaine and James Hetfield will fucking tell you. These guys have worked their fucking asses off for over 40 fucking years now. They're humble as shit. They don't care if they're playing an amphitheater in Las Vegas or Los Angeles or New York with Megadeth and Metallica, or if they're playing a fucking dumpy bar and grill in Mississauga, Ontario. They don't give a fuck, and I respect the ever-living shit out of that. But with all due respect, they've been making more or less the exact same album for a long time now, and the songwriting has been getting worse and worse. The musicianship has been getting sloppier. There's been less and less money being put into these records, and as a result, they've been getting worse and worse. And that trend continues with Impact is Imminent. In its absolute best moments, it is a totally serviceable, meat and potatoes hard rock heavy metal record, and in its absolute worst moments, it is a cringe-inducing boomer rock nightmare of epic fucking proportions. You know, just like every Anvil album in the past 20, 30 fucking years. Let's just be honest here. It's not as if their track record following metal on metal has been consistently fucking great. Some bands can get away with making the same record over and over. Motorhead, Cannibal Corpse, The Black Dahlia Murder, Aborted. Anvil is simply not one of those fucking bands. It's that fucking simple. Next up, we have Beautiful Shade of Grey, a brand new solo album from Dream Theater's lead singer, James LaBrie. I think a lot of people expected me to talk about this album as well because of my well-documented and slightly controversial opinions on Dream Theater and James LaBrie. But ultimately, when I sat down and listened to this record, I found I just didn't really have much to say. This is a very simplistic kind of prog rock record. It very much feels like a Dream Theater record, but less heavy, less interesting, less inspired. I appreciate the more organic production. It doesn't feel as synthetic or as cold as a Dream Theater record, namely their previous one, A View from the Top of the World, but I mean, James is still not that great of a singer. He's still got weird, spotty tones, and he has trouble maintaining his composure at times, and his lyrics aren't great, and yeah, the album's just not great. I guess if you wanted a softer version of A View from the Top of the World, this is it. Congrats, good for you, but yeah, I'm not a fan, to be blunt. Yeah. Moving on to something more exciting. Next up, we have a brand new EP from The Lord of the Lost entitled The Heartbeat of the Devil, and it's bad. It's really bad. It's better than their last album, Judas, but it's still pretty fucking bad. There's an overly melodramatic goth metal version of Iron Maiden's Children of the Damned, which makes me fucking cringe. There's a really lame, uninspired cover of Lady Gaga's Judas, which also makes me fucking cringe. There are two versions of the song The Heartbeat of the Devil, the version that was released as a standalone single, and there's also a piano-only version on this EP. This was one of the few songs I thought was kind of half-decent on Judas, but I'm kind of sick and tired of hearing it on this EP. Especially because the single version is identical and it feels like a bit of a waste of time, and the piano version is just so over-the-top, caked in melodrama that it just feels really unnecessary and, well, yeah, kind of cringy. It's just cringe, through and through, just like Their album from last year, Judas, which I named one of the worst albums of 2021. The only thing this EP has over that album is at least it doesn't have a really stupid, underdeveloped concept, and thankfully it's also a hell of a lot shorter. Next up, we have another brand new EP, this time from Primitive Man, entitled Insurmountable. This thing is every bit as fucking gnarly and disgusting and cavernous and mind-fucking as you would expect a Primitive Man record to be, except it's been condensed into an EP. And I kinda love it for that. Like, Primitive Man is a band I have to be in a very certain mood to really dive into, and for a long time I did not care at all for their particular blend of death and sludge and doom metal. And I mean, to be fair, this thing is still pretty long by EP standards, nearly 40 fucking minutes. But it's just short enough that I feel like I can get in and then get out without driving myself fucking insane. Like, I get all the crazy, sludgy, gross, extreme goodness that I want without having to devote basically an entire day to this bleak, dystopian nightmare of noise and destruction. I definitely think that much like other Primitive Man projects and releases, this would benefit from being shortened significantly. Like, there's at least 3 to 4 minutes worth of fat and filler on every single song that I would happily snip away like that. But man, when this thing hits, it fucking hits. And like I said, this is easier to get in and out of than other Primitive Man records because it is objectively much shorter and much more condensed, being an EP. Next up, we have Malicious Intent from Malevolence. A lot of y'all are talking about this record and have been wanting me to talk about this record. And I can see why. I do think y'all are overhyping this just a fucking wee bit. But I do see why people are loving this as much as they are. This is like a very introspective and emotive piece of hard-hitting metalcore. It's got like the best bits and pieces of like classic Hatebreed and Killswitch Engage with some really strong, reflective songwriting. A lot of really gnarly, crushing grooves and breakdowns and riffs. It's almost got a bit of a sludgy vibe to it. Like, there are some bits and pieces that would not be out of place on a Down record. I like that as heavy and hard-hitting as it can be, it's able to pull back and be a little bit more intimate, be a little bit more introspective. I appreciate that. Again, I'm not convinced this is an Album of the Year contender or like the second coming of Christ in metalcore form, like some of y'all are, but it is a very good record, and I am curious to see where Malevolence goes from here, because, I mean, they just keep getting bigger and bigger with each record. They keep getting more and more attention, so, yeah, I'm pumped. Next up, we have the Justitia EP from Baest, a Danish death metal band. These guys turned a lot of heads last year with their album Necrosapiens. They're back already with this EP, which features contributions from Sendicolue of Aborted fame and the late Trevor Strnad of the Black Dahlia Murder, which, come to think of it, unless he recorded a bunch of stuff before he passed, is probably the last time we'll hear a new song from anything Trevor Strnad affiliated, which feels really weird to say out loud. I don't like this. Ultimately, this is a continuation of what we heard on Necrosapiens. Tons of big, chunky grooves with a lot of intense riffs and in-your-face vocals, very reminiscent of, I would say, like some Morbid Angel stuff and some Cannibal Corpse stuff with little bits and pieces of Aborted and the Black Dahlia Murder, and I'm not just saying that because their respective singers are both featured on this EP. Overall, just a really, really, really fucking solid little death metal roller coaster, but, you know, bite-sized, you know? It's like a little, it's not a full-blown pizza, it's like a little pizza pocket, and it's fucking delicious. Next up, we have Kanawha Black from Nechochwen, an album I came dangerously close to reviewing. I kind of wish I had in retrospect. Anyone familiar with Panopticon and Falls of Rhoros will kind of know what to expect here. It's black and folk metal, heavily inspired by Americana. In the case of Nechochwen in particular, this is heavily inspired by Native American music and culture and history. It's not, in my opinion, as strong as The Heart of Akaman, which in retrospect was way ahead of its fucking time, but Kanawha Black is, in its own right, in its own regard, as a standalone record, an extremely solid piece of, like, atmospheric, melodic, black folk metal. The lyrics are coming from a very personal place, which makes this record feel very poignant, very impactful. The music is pretty sharp, tons of grand, majestic black metal hooks and harmonies. The production's a little flat, like it definitely feels like this thing could be more rich and more full. But everything sounds good enough through a consistent chunk of the record, and I'm enjoying myself through a solid majority of the record. Like, had I gone ahead and reviewed this, we're looking at either a very enthusiastic 3 out of 5 or maybe a lower 3.5 out of 5. I think it's a pretty strong record, and I would definitely recommend this to anyone who's looking for some more black metal in the vein of Panopticon and Falls of Rhoros, but with a little bit of a twist, a little bit of its own spice and flavor. Next up, we have the Exuviae of Gods Part 1, a brand new EP, the first of a couple, from what I understand, from Mournful Congregation. I'm not going to say too much, because I kind of want to wait and see where this series of EPs takes us. Like, I want to talk about the entire book as opposed to the individual chapters, you know what I mean? But I will say that there's a lot of really gloomy, gnarly, beautiful shit on here. It's very well produced. Funeral Doom is not really my thing, but I really like what Mournful Congregation have done in the past, and I really like what they're building up to and what they're hinting at on this EP. The title track, Exuviae of Gods in particular, I say this with no hyperbole, is one of the prettiest pieces of music Mournful Congregation have ever made. Listen to the EP for that track alone, ladies and gentlemen. Next up, we have Still as the Night, Cold as the Wind from Vital Spirit. In a lot of ways, this reminds me of the aforementioned Nechochwen. There's a lot of influence from Native American history and culture and music here. I think what separates this from the Nechochwen record is this is way more brutal. This is way more bloodthirsty, and the production is a lot bigger while also being a lot more raw and a lot more true to the kind of classic ethos of black metal. And as a result, quite frankly, just way more entertaining and way more powerful. Like, from start to finish, this thing shocks with lyrics pulled from history, very brutal and gruesome and uncomfortable history, and then complements it perfectly with this very stark, very abrasive black metal fury. There are some more folky moments and some more kind of epic flares here and there that almost bring to mind Wayfarer, but for the most part, this is very stark, very straight to the point, and very, very, very brutal. And I gotta say, I kinda love this. Like, this thing's fucking awesome. This is maybe one of my favorite black metal records of the year, which I know is a bold statement. Black metal has been so good just in these past few months. I mean, Vehemence, Devilmaster, Watain, like, black metal's been on a fucking roll so far this year. Next up, we have the Singularity from Wofat, and this thing fucking rules. It is an instrumental, psychedelic, progressive, stoner metal kind of record. It almost feels like a long-lost fusion of Jimi Hendrix, Mastodon, and The Sword. Tons of scuzzy fucking riffs complemented by soaring vintage guitar hooks and melodies and solos, crushing beats. It's fun. It's kind of unpredictable. There's a lot of variety in the songwriting and in the presentation and in the overall layout. It's by no means a game changer in the realms of, like, stoner metal. Like, if you're familiar with any of the artists we've talked about, then you're probably familiar with this to a certain extent. I mean, even if you're familiar with Radio Moscow or other Wofat records, then you kind of already know what to expect here, but you know, I'm fine with that. You know, this is like comfort food. This is like meatloaf and mac and cheese and pork chops and collard greens. Like, you don't need, like, all these fancy spices and all these special oils and like, imported exotic vegetables and fruits. Sometimes it just needs to be meatloaf and mac and cheese and pork chops and collard greens. Sometimes it's just perfect the way it is. That's how I feel about the Singularity. Definitely check this out if you're looking for something to just buzz the fuck out to and jam with your buddies. Open some fucking brewskis, pound them back, have some edibles, smoke a couple of joints, maybe watch a stupid movie. It's great. It's fun. Check it out. Next up, we have All Juice, No Noise from Steaksauce, Mustache, and it's comedy metal slash like metallic hardcore and metalcore, and it's very absurd, very over the top, very, very, very stupid. I can't say I like this record, but I definitely appreciate it. Like, if you're going to do weird, satirical, absurd shit, this is probably how it should be done, in my opinion. Like, the music is still genuinely pretty solid and doesn't rely on the lyrics alone to do their thing. There's some really jarring rhythms and some chaotic sounds here and there that wouldn't be out of place on a mathcore record. For the most part, it's some really heavy-hitting kind of 90s, early 2000s metallic hardcore with some post-hardcore vibes. It's very aggressive. It's in your face. The jokes are all very stupid, very juvenile, but again, I think that's kind of the point. I don't really think it's trying to set up a joke and then deliver a punchline in the way that something like a Brian Posehn record is trying to, or a Tenacious D record. I think it's trying to just throw a lot of silliness at you, and it succeeds mostly on that. Like No Earth Theory and Stepdad Energy in particular, I was chuckling. I had a sly little smile on my face reading through some of these lyrics. It's not my cup of tea, all things considered, but hey, if you are looking for something very silly and weird and absurd, but you still want your hard-hitting, muscular riffs and rhythms, then, you know, you'll find a nice solid middle ground with this record from Steaksauce Mustache. Next up, we have The Foul Death of Engelond from Sacred Sun. Up until this point, Sacred Sun have been a more straightforward kind of black metal band, but on this record, they're branching out big time. They're getting more progressive, more experimental, more high concept, bringing in some influences from folk music, from Funeral Doom. They're playing around with clean vocals and ritualistic chanting, and overall this thing is a lot more varied and a lot more ambitious than, well, your typical black metal record, which I appreciate big time. What I don't appreciate is the pacing of this record. All of these songs are way too long and ultimately feel somewhat bloated and tired even by the time you get to some of the more exciting shifts and changes and influences and flavors. I mean, the shortest track on here, The Boy King, is still nearly 9 minutes long, and that length doesn't really feel justified even despite the more epic doom metal soundscapes and ideas. I appreciate Sacred Sun going into more ambitious territory, but I think parts of this record are ultimately crushed by its ambition. It collapses under the weight of its ambition, which is a shame because if this were more cohesive, if this were tighter, if this were better edited, if the rough edges were smoothed out, I think Sacred Sun would be on the verge of something pretty fucking unique and pretty fucking awesome, but c'est la vie, maybe the next album will be tighter. You can only go up from here as I see it. Next up, we have quite a mouthful. We have Crepuscular Dirge for the Blessed Ones from Cosmic Putrefaction. What does any of that mean? I've no fucking clue. Here's what I do know. This is a maelstrom of chaotic, distorted, nonsensical technical death metal, and I mean that in the best way possible. Tons of bizarre and discordant melodies, tons of blackened death metal-like flurries of riffery and blast beats, tons of really technical, shape-shifting arrangements. It's wild, it's unpredictable. It kind of reminds me of stuff I've come to expect from, like, Ulthar or even the last Woad record, but definitely way more technical. Every time I re-listen to this record, it feels like I'm rewatching a really good movie or rereading a really good book. Like I'm finding all these bits and pieces I didn't notice before, Easter eggs and references and little plot threads that maybe at first I didn't think much of, but now I'm like, oh, and that's how he got the knife and and that's how he did the thing with his brother. And you know, you get the idea. It's one of those records. It just constantly reveals more and more layers to you as you dive deeper into it. It's a rewarding record. Like, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And I love shit like this. I love just shape-shifting, immersive, technical, progressive death metal and extreme metal. Like, it's so exciting. So, of course, I'm already all the fuck over this. Next up, we have Discarnate Ails from Haunter. This actually reminds me a lot of the album we just talked about from Cosmic Putrefaction. Although this one feels more firmly rooted within the realms of, like, underground death metal. You know, it's more riff heavy, there's more gutturals, it's more sonically brutal. It's definitely varied, and it's definitely diverse, and has a lot of different flavors and influences of its own, but not to the extent of Cosmic Putrefaction. But, hey, that's fine. That's fine too. Haunter doing their own thing, you know? It's similar, but not too similar. It's just different enough. Think of it like this. One night, you go to one steakhouse. The second night, you go to another, because I guess you got a big-ass wallet in this scenario. That's not important. One steakhouse does the steak one way. Another steakhouse does a steak a different way. Maybe they're different cuts. Maybe they're served, maybe one's got a chimichurri, maybe the other's got like a guajillo butter, or like some kind of blue cheese gorgonzola butter, or whatever the fuck. Maybe one comes with a baked potato, maybe the other comes with french fries. Maybe one gets a salad and the other gets root vegetables. Both are great. They're both steak. They're both great, they're both doing their own things. It's all good. I sure as hell enjoyed it. But I guess I'm also kind of biased, as I just made perfectly clear I love shit like this, so I guess if the Cosmic Putrefaction record didn't do anything for you, don't bother, this wouldn't do anything for you either, but if you like steak, like me, and you're fine with two different steakhouses doing steaks two different ways, fucking enjoy, bud. Next up, we have something that I'm absolutely going to butcher, so I apologize in advance. The album is called Tlazacaltiliztli, and the band is called Tzompantli. Yeah. I fucked that up hard. In my defense, there's a genuine possibility that this band struck me so hard in the back of the head with this music that I have a bit of a concussion. Because, I mean, this shit is brutal. This shit is so chaotic. It is so fucking violent. This thing is easily one of the heaviest records I've heard this year. Very classic kind of old school Death Doom, with, like, classic death metal flavor. Think Autopsy meets early Cannibal Corpse and some, like, I don't know, maybe a little bit of Incantation thrown in there, but with indigenous instrumentation and a really balls-to-the-wall heavy fucking sound mix. I mean, this thing is just so fucking brutal. Like, I fucking love this thing, man. One of the best death metal records I think I've heard this year. It's right up there with Venom Prison and Undeath. Holy shit, you guys need to fucking check this out if you somehow haven't already. And finally, let's wrap this up with something a little different. Mark Tremonti sings Frank Sinatra from Mark Tremonti. Yeah, Mark, for those of you who don't know, is the guitarist for Alter Bridge and Creed, the former of which is an awesome band, the latter of which, not so much. I actually did a poll on the community page of this channel asking y'all if you wanted to talk about this in a full album review. And there wasn't really a lot of enthusiasm for that, but I kind of decided I wanted to highlight this album regardless, hence why it's here. This is not a metal record, it's not even a rock record, really. It is Mark Tremonti, true to the album's title, literally singing classic Frank Sinatra songs, and doing so rather faithfully, might I add. I mean, there are some changes made to some of these arrangements, but nothing too grand or spectacular. But honestly, I'm not really bothered by that. Like, this is really fucking good. I was worried that this was going to be like a Danzig sings Elvis type situation, but no, quite the opposite. This is everything Danzig sings Elvis wanted to be, and, well, I want to say should have been, but Danzig fucking sucks nowadays, so that's impossible. The point is, it's actually a really good fucking record, and Mark does a really great job transforming these tracks and making them his own without robbing them of their identity and meaning and vibe. He actually is a great fucking singer on this record. He's been pretty solid in general, but on this record, he just kind of nails that classic, smooth, sexy, jazzy tone. All of these songs are very well arranged and well produced. It's crisp, it's smooth, and on top of all that, supporting this record in any capacity, streaming it or preferably buying it, is also supporting a good cause. Because as it turns out, 100% of the album's proceeds will go to the National Down Syndrome Society to help people with developmental disabilities. That is fucking beautiful. God bless you, Frank, you absolute fucking Chad. So yeah, fuck it. Check it out. It's not metal, but fuck it, who cares? It's good and it's supporting a very good cause. And I think that'll do it for me. I mean, to be honest, there are tons and tons and tons of other records that I could spend all day talking about because May consistently had so many interesting and exciting records. But eventually I gotta go to work. Eventually I gotta have breakfast and shower before I go to work, so we're gonna call it quits right about here. Thank you for watching. Let me know what other albums you feel I missed in the month of May 2022. I probably won't review them, but I'll listen to them, for shits and giggles. Press this button right here to subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown immediately. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.